Welcome to the work, A Tale of Two Cities, by author Charles Dickens. Let's listen together. Part 1. Recalling Life. It was the best of times. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so much like the present period that some of the loudest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil. In the superlative degree of comparison only, there was a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face on the throne of England. There was a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face on the throne of France. In both countries, for the rulers who monopolized the nation's stores of bread and fish, it was plainly seen that everything was settled once and for all. It was the year 1775. Prophecies had become fashionable in England at that time, and in the same period a lowly soldier in the Guards, who had some gift of foretelling, had already predicted the extraordinary advent of the prophetess Southcote, who had just reached the age of 25, by declaring that London and Westminster were destined to be buried. Even the ghost in Cock Lane, after rattling its messages for over 12 years, had lain dormant no longer than a decade. Then, only a year prior, many other spirits, not entirely supernatural in origin, began to rattle messages about mundane events affecting the king and his subjects, stemming from a gathering of the British populace in the American colonies. Curiously enough, these messages proved to matter to mankind even more than any of the long-received communications through the various little devils of Cock Lane. In general, being fond of mystic matters, the French were no less intrigued. They printed more paper money as they fell ever faster into the abyss. Moreover, under the guidance of Christian shepherds, France amused itself with humanitarian achievements, such as sentencing a young man to have both hands cut off, his tongue torn out, and his body burned, simply because he refused to kneel in the rain to show respect for a filthy procession of monks passing 40 or 50 meters away. Very likely, at the time of this wretched man's execution, many tall trees growing in the forests of France and Norway had already been marked by the woodcutter of fate to be felled, sawn into boards, and fashioned into the mobile guillotine, a most dreadful device in history. Very likely, in the makeshift huts of peasants near Paris on that very day, crude wagons sheltered from sun and rain, muddy and rural, were being prepared for the guillotine prisoners' transport. The woodcutter and the farmer of death worked tirelessly but silently, so that no one heard a sound. Yet just a hint of awareness by anyone could bring charges of impiety and rebellion. In England, there were hardly any laws to defend such civic pride. Armed robberies and highway thefts occurred nightly in the capital. Families were publicly warned not to leave the city without moving their belongings to warehouses for safety. The robber in the dark was usually an urban merchant in daylight, and if recognized and challenged by a fellow accomplice posing as a leader, he would boldly shoot the challenger in the head and ride off. Carriages were ambushed by 7 thieves. The escort shot 3, and then, due to a misfire, he was shot by the remaining 4, after which the carriage passed unharmed. The respected Lord Mayor of London had to stand still at Turnham Green, while a single rogue stripped him of his dignities before his attendants. Prisoners in London's jails fought wardens and law enforcement with guns, firing volleys of lead and pellets into the chaos. Thieves snapped diamond-encrusted crosses from the necks of nobles during royal festivities. A company of soldiers raided St. Giles for contraband, and the townspeople fired upon the troops. Troops fired upon the townspeople, yet no one thought it unusual. In such a context, the useless were more troublesome than the useful, and the executioner constantly received orders, sometimes hanging rows of criminals, sometimes hanging a thief caught Tuesday on Saturday, sometimes burning dozens alive before Newgate, sometimes destroying small book collections before Westminster Hall, today killing a cruel murderer, and tomorrow a petty thief who had stolen sixpence from a peasant's child. All these events, and thousands of similar ones, occurred continuously in that memorable year 1775. Amid these happenings, while the woodcutter and the farmer of death moved in secret, the two large-jawed kings and the two queens, one plain, one fair, still trod their paths vigorously, raising high the sacred privileges of monarchy. Thus the great and the lowly alike, those whose stories were recorded in books, were guided by the year 1775 along the paths of fate,